close your eyes and let your breathing slow as we journey together into a world where magic still whispers through ancient forests and love blooms in the most unexpected places. Tonight, we're stepping into a tale as old as time itself, where beauty lies not in what the eye can see, but in what the heart discovers. This is a story of transformation, of patience, and of a love so pure it could break the strongest curse ever cast. In a kingdom far from here, where morning mist danced through cobblestone streets and merchants called out their wares in melodic voices, there lived a young woman named Belle. Her name meant beauty, though she never thought much about her appearance. While other young ladies in the village spent their mornings arranging their hair and choosing ribbons, Belle could be found with her nose buried deep in the pages of a book, lost in adventures that carried her far beyond the familiar walls of her small town. The village where Belle lived was the sort of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where gossip traveled faster than the morning bread delivery, and where being different was often mistaken for being strange. Belle was certainly different. She walked with purpose while others strolled aimlessly. She asked questions while others simply nodded. She dreamed of distant lands and grand adventures while others were content with their daily routines. Her father, Maurice, was an inventor whose workshop filled their modest cottage with the sounds of hammering, the hiss of steam, and the occasional explosion that would rattle the windows and send the neighbors' chickens squawking in alarm. Maurice was a gentle soul with kind eyes and hands that were always stained with grease or paint. He understood his daughter's restless spirit because he shared it. While she escaped into books, he escaped into his inventions, creating wonderful contraptions that rarely worked as intended, but always sparked wonder in those who saw them. The villagers found Maurice as peculiar as his daughter. They would shake their heads when he passed by, muttering about the eccentric inventor and his bookish child. But Maurice and Belle paid little attention to the whispers. They had each other, and that was enough. Their small cottage was filled with warmth, laughter, and the comfortable silence that comes when two people understand each other completely. One crisp autumn morning, when the leaves had turned the color of amber and wine, and the air carried the sweet scent of apple orchards, Maurice prepared for a journey to the neighboring town's market. He had completed his latest invention, a mechanical wood-chopping device that he was certain would bring them enough money to buy Belle all the books her heart desired. I see. Belle helped her father load his contraption onto their old cart, securing it with ropes and checking the wheels twice to make sure they wouldn't come loose on the winding forest road. As Maurice prepared to leave, Belle noticed how the morning light caught the silver threads in his hair, reminding her that her father was growing older and that these journeys were becoming more difficult for him. The forest path that led to the market was one that Maurice had traveled many times before. Yet on this particular morning, something felt different. The trees seemed taller, their branches reaching across the path like protective arms. The shadows fell in unusual patterns, creating shapes that seemed to shift and dance when viewed from the corner of one's eye. The very air hummed with an energy that made the hair on the back of Maurice's neck stand up. As his cart bumped along the rutted road, Maurice began to notice that the familiar landmarks were nowhere to be seen. The old oak tree with the lightning scar that marked the halfway point to town was missing. The stream that usually babbled cheerfully alongside the path had vanished. Even the birds seemed to have fallen silent, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky, yet Maurice found himself more lost with each turn of the cart's wheels. The path seemed to wind endlessly through woods that grew darker and more mysterious with every passing moment. Ancient trees towered overhead, their trunks so wide that it would take 10 men holding hands to encircle them. Moss hung from their branches like tattered curtains, and somewhere in the distance, the mournful call of an owl echoed through the stillness. Maurice's heart began to race as he realized that he had somehow wandered far from any road he recognized. The mechanical contraption in his cart seemed to mock him with its silence, a reminder that for all his inventive genius, he was helplessly lost in a forest that seemed to exist outside the normal rules of geography and time. Just as panic began to set in, Maurice spotted something extraordinary through the trees ahead. Rising from a clearing bathed in ethereal light stood a castle unlike any he had ever seen. Its towers stretched impossibly high into the cloudy sky, their spires topped with flags that fluttered in a wind he could not feel. The walls were built from stone that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light, changing from silver to gold to deep purple as clouds passed overhead. The castle appeared both magnificent and foreboding, beautiful yet somehow melancholy, as if it were a place where joy had once lived but had long since departed. Gargoyles perched on the corners of the battlements, their stone faces frozen in expressions of eternal sorrow. Gardens surrounded the castle, but even from a distance, Maurice could see that they had been allowed to grow wild, with roses climbing over marble statues and ivy claiming the ornate fountains. Despite his better judgment, Maurice found himself drawn to this mysterious castle. His cart seemed to move of its own accord down the hill toward the massive iron gates that stood slightly ajar, as if welcoming him inside. As he approached, the gates swung open with a groan that seemed to echo from the very stones themselves, revealing a courtyard paved with smooth cobblestones that gleamed like polished jewels. Maurice hesitated at the threshold, every instinct telling him to turn around and find another path home. But the forest behind him had grown dark and threatening, and storm clouds were gathering overhead with unnatural speed. Rain began to fall in fat, heavy drops that quickly turned into a downpour. With nowhere else to go, Maurice guided his cart through the gates and into the castle's courtyard. The moment he crossed the threshold, the heavy gates swung shut behind him with a finality that made his blood run cold. He was trapped, though the courtyard itself seemed welcoming enough. Warm light spilled from the castle's windows, and he could smell something wonderful cooking, as if a feast was being prepared just beyond those massive wooden doors. Maurice unhitched his horse and led the faithful animal to what appeared to be a stable. To his amazement, fresh hay had been laid out, and a trough of clean water waited as if his arrival had been expected. The horse seemed relieved to be out of the rain, and immediately began munching contentedly on the hay, apparently unbothered by the strangeness of their situation. With his horse cared for, Maurice approached the castle's main entrance. The doors were easily twice his height and carved with intricate designs that seemed to tell a story, though the meaning was lost to him. He raised his hand to knock, but before his knuckles could touch the wood, the doors swung open silently, revealing a grand entrance hall that took his breath away. Chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling like frozen waterfalls of crystal, casting dancing light across marble floors so polished they reflected like mirrors. A grand staircase curved upward into shadow, its banister carved from what appeared to be a single piece of dark wood. Tapestries covered the walls, depicting scenes of nobles in elaborate dress, dancing in gardens filled with impossible flowers. But what struck Maurice most powerfully was the silence, not the peaceful quiet of a sleeping house, but the heavy, oppressive silence of a place where voices had been stilled for far too long. His footsteps echoed loudly as he stepped inside, each sound seeming to bounce off the walls and return to him changed, as if the very stones were trying to speak, but had forgotten how. A fire crackled warmly in an enormous fireplace, and beside it sat a table set for one, with steaming dishes that smelled of roasted meat and fresh bread. Maurice's stomach growled, reminding him that he had not eaten since dawn. Yet something about the scene made him hesitate. Who had prepared this meal? And why had they set it for exactly one person? As if in answer to his unspoken question, a voice spoke from the shadows at the top of the grand staircase. It was deep and resonant, but carried within it a sadness so profound that Maurice felt his heart contract with unexpected sympathy. The voice was cultured and refined, yet there was something in its tone that suggested great pain, as if each word cost its speaker dearly. The voice welcomed Maurice to the castle, explaining that he had sought shelter from the storm and was welcome to eat and rest. Yet the speaker remained hidden in the shadows, never showing himself, never stepping into the light where Maurice might see his face. This strange hospitality both comforted and unsettled the lost inventor, who found himself torn between gratitude and growing unease. Maurice accepted the mysterious host's invitation, though his hands trembled slightly as he approached the perfectly set table. The food was unlike anything he had ever tasted, each bite seeming to carry flavors that reminded him of home, of Belle's laughter, of warm summer evenings spent in their garden. The bread was soft and warm, as if it had just emerged from the oven. The soup tasted of herbs he recognized, but could never have afforded, and the wine warmed him from the inside out, chasing away the chill of the storm. As he ate, Maurice became aware that he was not entirely alone. Though he saw no servants, his water glass never emptied, and fresh courses appeared the moment he finished the previous ones. Shadows seemed to move at the edge of his vision, always just beyond where he could focus clearly. Once, he could have sworn he heard the soft whisper of fabric, as if someone in a long gown had passed behind his chair. The voice from the stairs spoke again, asking about his journey, about his destination. Maurice found himself telling this unseen host about his invention, about Belle, about their quiet life in the village. Something in the voice's tone encouraged confession, and Maurice spoke more freely than he had in years. He told of his worries about Belle's future, about how the villagers saw her as strange, about his fear that his inventions would never provide the security she deserved. The mysterious host listened without judgment, occasionally asking gentle questions that showed he was truly paying attention. There was loneliness in that voice, Maurice realized, a deep hunger for conversation and connection that matched his own need for understanding. For a brief moment, the strangeness of the situation faded, and Maurice felt as if he were simply sharing a meal with a friend. But as the evening wore on and exhaustion began to claim him, Maurice knew he could not stay. Belle would be worried, and morning would bring new concerns about his failed journey to market. He expressed his gratitude to his unseen host and prepared to leave, but the voice from the shadows grew firm, almost desperate. The storm still raged outside, the host explained, and the forest paths were treacherous in such weather. Maurice must stay the night, must rest in one of the castle's many guest chambers. Tomorrow, when the sun returned and the roads were clear, he could continue his journey safely. Maurice wanted to protest, but exhaustion weighed heavily on his shoulders, and the wind howling outside the castle walls reminded him of the dangers that waited in the dark forest. Reluctantly, he agreed to stay, following a floating candle that appeared to guide him up the grand staircase and down a long corridor lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to track his movement. The guest chamber was more luxurious than anything Maurice had ever imagined. The bed was enormous, piled high with silk pillows and coverlets that looked fit for royalty. A fire burned merrily in the hearth, and his travel clothes had been mysteriously replaced with a fine nightgown that fit him perfectly. Fresh water waited in a basin, carved from what appeared to be a single piece of rose quartz, and towels, softer than clouds, hung nearby. Despite his exhaustion, sleep came slowly to Maurice. The bed was too soft, the room too grand, the silence too complete. Every creak of the ancient timbers, every whisper of wind through the stone walls seemed amplified in the darkness. He found himself listening for footsteps in the corridor, for voices in distant rooms, for any sign of the life that such a magnificent castle should contain. When sleep finally claimed him, Maurice's dreams were filled with Belle. He saw her pacing their small cottage, worry creasing her lovely brow as she waited for his return. He dreamed of her reading by candlelight, her lips moving silently as she lost herself in adventures far more exciting than their quiet village life. In his dreams, she called out to him, her voice carried on winds that seemed to blow from very far away. Morning came gently to the enchanted castle, with sunlight streaming through tall windows and filling the guest chamber with warmth. Maurice woke feeling more rested than he had in months, though his dreams had left him with a lingering sense of urgency. He dressed quickly in his own clothes, which had been cleaned and mended while he slept, and made his way downstairs to thank his host before departing. The great hall was empty in the morning light, though breakfast waited on the same table where he had dined the evening before. The voice from the shadows spoke one final time, wishing him safe travels and expressing hope that their paths might cross again someday. There was something wistful in those words, something that spoke of years of solitude and the rare joy of human company. Maurice loaded his cart and prepared to leave, but as he guided his horse through the courtyard, something caught his eye that made him stop in wonder. Growing beside the castle's main entrance was a rose garden, unlike any he had ever seen. The flowers bloomed in impossible colors, from deep crimson to pure white to shades of pink that seemed to glow with inner light. Their fragrance filled the morning air with sweetness that reminded him powerfully of Belle's favorite perfume. Without thinking, Maurice dismounted and approached the garden. Belle loved roses above all other flowers, and he had never been able to afford to buy them for her. Here was beauty beyond price, blooming wild and free. Surely his mysterious host would not begrudge him a single bloom to carry home to his daughter. Maurice selected the most perfect rose he could find, its petals the color of fresh snow, touched with the faintest blush of dawn. As his fingers closed around the stem, careful to avoid the thorns, the morning air suddenly grew cold. The sun seemed to dim, and shadows fell across the courtyard like dark fingers reaching from the castle walls. A roar shook the very stones beneath Maurice's feet, a sound of rage and anguish so terrible that his horse reared in terror and his own heart nearly stopped beating. From the castle's entrance emerged a figure that made Maurice's blood freeze in his veins. This was his host, the owner of that cultured, lonely voice, but he was like no man Maurice had ever seen. The beast stood nearly 8 feet tall, his powerful frame covered in fur the color of midnight. His hands ended in claws that could rend stone, and his face combined the features of wolf and lion in a visage both terrifying and somehow deeply sad. His eyes, golden and intelligent, burned with fury at the theft of his rose. Yet beneath that anger, Maurice glimpsed something else entirely: pain, loneliness, a sorrow so deep it seemed to have carved itself into the very bones of this magnificent, terrible creature. The beast's voice, when he spoke, was the same one that had welcomed Maurice the night before, but now it shook with barely controlled rage. He accused Maurice of betraying his hospitality, of stealing what was most precious to him. The roses, he explained, were all that remained beautiful in his cursed existence, and to take one without permission was an unforgivable crime. Maurice fell to his knees, the stolen rose still clutched in his trembling hand. He begged for forgiveness, explaining that he had meant no harm, that the flower was intended as a gift for his beloved daughter. But the beast would hear no excuses. The law of his domain had been broken, and justice demanded payment. The punishment was imprisonment, the beast declared. Maurice would remain in the castle as his prisoner for the rest of his days, a consequence of his thoughtless theft. No amount of pleading would change this verdict. The beast had been betrayed too many times, had trusted too often only to be hurt, and he would not show mercy again. As Maurice was led away to the castle's tower, where a cell waited with bars as thick as a man's arm, he thought only of Belle. She would wait for his return, would wonder what had become of him, would eventually realize that her father was never coming home. The rose fell from his numb fingers, its perfect petals scattering on the cold stone floor like drops of blood. Days passed in the tower cell, though Maurice found it difficult to count them in a place where sunlight barely penetrated. Food appeared regularly, and his basic needs were met, but the beast never showed himself again. Maurice could sometimes hear him pacing in distant corridors, his heavy footsteps echoing through the stone halls like the heartbeat of the castle itself. The inventor spent his captivity thinking of Belle, imagining her life without him, worrying about how she would survive alone in a village that had never understood her. He spoke to her as if she could hear him, telling her of his love, of his regret, of his desperate wish that he could see her face one more time. Meanwhile, in the village far below, Belle had indeed begun to worry. Her father's journey should have taken no more than 3 days, but a week had passed without word. She questioned the merchants who traveled the forest roads, but none had seen Maurice or his distinctive cart. The village constable suggested that perhaps the eccentric inventor had simply decided to try his luck in a different town. But Belle knew her father would never leave without telling her. On the 8th day of Maurice's absence, his old horse returned to the village alone, still wearing its harness but pulling no cart. The sight of the faithful animal, exhausted and wild-eyed, confirmed Belle's worst fears. Something terrible had happened to her father, and she was the only one who could help him. Without hesitation, Belle saddled the horse and set out into the forest, following the same path her father had taken. She carried with her a small pack of food, a warm cloak, and the unshakable determination that comes from love and desperation combined. The villagers watched her leave with shaking heads and whispered predictions that both father and daughter were now lost to whatever dangers lurked in the deep woods. The forest seemed different to Belle than it ever had before, wilder and more mysterious, as if she were traveling not just through trees and undergrowth, but through the pages of one of her beloved fairy tales. Ancient oaks whispered secrets in languages she almost understood, and paths appeared where none had been moments before, leading her deeper into a realm where magic still held sway. As evening approached, and Belle began to fear she would have to spend the night alone in the woods, she saw it through the trees ahead. The castle rose before her like something from a dream, its towers reaching toward the first stars of night, its windows glowing with warm light that promised shelter and answers to her desperate questions. Belle approached the magnificent castle with her heart pounding against her ribs, like a caged bird desperate for freedom. The massive iron gates stood open as if welcoming her, though shadows danced between the bars in ways that made her wonder if she truly wanted to accept their invitation. Her father's horse whinnied softly, sensing something in the air that Belle could feel but not name, an electricity that made the fine hairs on her arms stand up despite the warm evening breeze. The courtyard beyond the gates was even more breathtaking up close than it had appeared from the forest. Cobblestones gleamed like scattered jewels in the moonlight, and fountains that had once sung with flowing water now stood silent, their marble figures frozen in eternal dance. Belle dismounted and led her horse toward what appeared to be a stable, her footsteps echoing in the vast space with a loneliness that seemed to seep into her very bones. As she settled her father's horse in a stall beside another that she recognized immediately, Belle's heart leaped with hope. This was Maurice's faithful companion, the gentle mare who had carried him to market countless times. Her father was here, somewhere within these towering walls, and Belle would find him no matter what dangers waited in the shadows. The castle's main entrance loomed before her, its carved doors telling stories in wood and metal that seemed to shift and change when she wasn't looking directly at them. Belle raised her hand to knock, but before her knuckles could touch the ancient wood, the doors swung open with a whisper that sounded almost like a sigh of relief. Beyond lay a grand hall that took her breath away, its beauty so overwhelming that for a moment she forgot her fear entirely. Chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks from a ceiling so high it disappeared into darkness above. The marble floors reflected her image back at her, but somehow the Belle in the reflection seemed braver, more determined than she felt. Tapestries covered the walls, their threads woven with scenes of a life she could barely imagine, where ladies in silk gowns danced with gentlemen in velvet coats under stars that seemed to twinkle with real light. But it was the silence that struck her most powerfully. This was not the comfortable quiet of a library or the peaceful stillness of early morning. This was the heavy silence of a place where laughter had died, where music had been forgotten, where joy itself had packed its bags and moved somewhere warmer. Belle's voice, when she finally found the courage to call out, seemed small and fragile in that vast space. She called for her father, her words echoing off the stone walls and returning to her changed, as if the castle itself was trying to answer, but had forgotten how to form the right sounds. No human voice responded, but Belle could have sworn she heard something else, a rustling like silk skirts, a whisper like wind through leaves, sounds that suggested she was not entirely alone in this magnificent tomb. A floating candle appeared as if from nowhere, its flame dancing cheerfully in defiance of the castle's melancholy atmosphere. It bobbed before her like a firefly, clearly wanting her to follow. Belle had read enough fairy tales to know that following mysterious lights rarely led to anything good. But her father was somewhere in this place, and she would brave any danger to reach him. The candle led her through corridors lined with portraits, whose eyes seemed to track her movement, past suits of armor that stood at attention, as if their occupants had simply stepped out for a moment. Door after door lined the hallways, each one closed, each one hiding secrets that Belle could only imagine. Some rooms leaked soft music, melodies so beautiful they made her heart ache with longing for something she couldn't name. Others whispered, with voices too low to understand, but too clear to ignore. Finally, the candle began to rise, floating up a spiral staircase that wound its way into one of the castle's towers. Belle's legs grew heavy with each step, and her heart hammered with increasing urgency as she climbed higher and higher into the night. At the top of the staircase waited a heavy wooden door bound with iron, and from beyond it came a sound that made Belle's eyes fill with tears of relief. Her father's voice, weak but unmistakably his, was singing softly to himself one of the lullabies he had sung to her as a child. Belle rushed to the door and pressed her face against the small barred window, calling out to him with joy and desperation mingled in her voice. Maurice looked up from where he sat on a simple cot, his face gaunt and pale, but lighting up with wonder at the sight of his daughter. He rushed to the door, reaching through the bars to touch her face, as if to convince himself she was real. But his joy quickly turned to horror as he realized what her presence meant. Belle was now trapped in this cursed place, just as he was, and there would be no escape for either of them. Through the bars, Maurice told Belle the story of his capture, of the stolen rose and the terrible beast who ruled this domain. He begged her to leave while she still could, to forget about him and live her life in safety. But Belle had not traveled through an enchanted forest and climbed a tower in a cursed castle only to abandon the person she loved most in the world. As father and daughter whispered through the iron bars, sharing their love and their fear in equal measure, neither noticed the shadow that had appeared at the top of the staircase. The beast stood watching them, his massive form hidden in darkness, listening to their reunion with an expression that might have been longing if anyone had been able to see it clearly. When Belle finally became aware of his presence, she turned with a gasp that echoed through the tower like a bird's cry. The beast stepped forward into the light, and Belle saw him fully for the first time. He was even more magnificent and terrible than her father's whispered descriptions had suggested, a creature who seemed to embody both the wildest fury of nature and the deepest sadness of a broken heart. His fur caught the candlelight and threw it back in shades of brown and gold and deepest black. His eyes, when they met hers, held intelligence and pain in equal measure. His voice, when he finally spoke, was the same cultured tone that had welcomed her father, but now it carried the weight of years of solitude and the careful control of barely contained emotion. The beast explained the situation with a formality that couldn't quite hide his own surprise at Belle's appearance. Maurice had stolen from him, had violated the sacred law of hospitality, and justice demanded payment. The old man would remain his prisoner until the end of his days, a consequence that could not be changed or negotiated. But Belle, who had spent her life reading stories of impossible situations and miraculous solutions, was not prepared to accept this verdict. She looked at the beast with clear eyes that showed no fear, only determination, and made an offer that stunned both her father and her captor into silence. She would take her father's place. She would become the beast's prisoner, would accept whatever punishment he deemed fit. If only Maurice could go free. Her father was old and frail, she argued, while she was young and strong. The trade was fair, perhaps even generous, and she asked only that the beast consider it with the same justice he claimed to value. Maurice cried out in horror, begging his daughter to reconsider, to leave him, and save herself. But Belle had made her decision with the same quiet certainty that had guided every important choice in her life. She would not abandon the person who had loved her, supported her dreams, and taught her that being different was not the same as being wrong. The beast stared at Belle for a long moment, his golden eyes searching her face as if trying to read her very soul. No one had ever offered to sacrifice themselves for another in his presence. No one had ever looked at him without fear or revulsion. No one had ever spoken to him as if he were something more than a monster. And her calm courage stirred something in his heart that he had thought dead forever. Finally, the beast agreed to her bargain, but with conditions that made Belle's stomach clench with new fear. She must promise never to try to escape, must accept that she would spend the rest of her life within these walls, must understand that once her father left, she would be completely alone with a creature whose moods were as changeable as storm winds. Belle nodded her acceptance, though her voice trembled slightly as she gave her word. The beast produced an enormous key from somewhere within his dark fur and unlocked Maurice's cell with hands that shook despite their size and power. The old inventor stumbled out and gathered his daughter in his arms, both of them crying now with the bittersweet pain of love and separation. Maurice begged the beast to reconsider, offered his life's work, his few possessions, anything of value he could think of in exchange for Belle's freedom. But the beast had made his decision, and like all the choices in his cursed existence, it could not be undone. Maurice must leave immediately, before the beast changed his mind and decided to keep them both. The farewell between father and daughter was heartbreaking in its tenderness. They held each other as if they could somehow merge into one person who would never have to face the world alone. Belle whispered promises that she would be brave, that she would find a way to be happy, even in captivity. Maurice made her promise to remember that she was loved, that she was precious, that no prison could contain the beauty of her spirit. As the beast led Maurice away to freedom, Belle was left alone in the tower cell that would now be her home. The door clanged shut with a finality that seemed to echo through her bones, and she heard the key turn with a sound like the closing of a book whose ending she would never know. Through the small barred window, Belle could see the forest stretching away into the distance, dark and mysterious under the star-filled sky. Somewhere out there, her father was making his way home to their empty cottage, where her books still waited on their shelves, and her favorite chair still sat by the window where she had dreamed of adventures in far-off lands. Now she was living an adventure of her own, though it was nothing like the stories she had read. There were no dashing princes or fairy godmothers, no magic spells that could be broken with a kiss or a kind deed. There was only a frightened young woman, a heartbroken beast, and a castle full of shadows where love seemed as impossible as the magic that had created this strange, beautiful prison. The beast returned to the tower after seeing Maurice safely to the forest's edge. He stood outside Belle's cell for a long moment, listening to her quiet breathing, wanting to say something that might comfort her, but finding no words adequate to the situation. Finally, he spoke through the heavy door, his voice gentler than it had been before. He told her that she would not remain in the tower, that tomorrow she would be given proper quarters befitting a guest rather than a prisoner. He explained that the castle was vast, with libraries and gardens and rooms filled with wonders she could explore freely, as long as she remembered her promise never to try to escape. Belle listened to his words with growing surprise. This was not the treatment she had expected from her captor, and she found herself curious about this creature who spoke with such courtesy, even as he held her against her will. When she asked why he was being kind to her, the beast was quiet for so long that she wondered if he had left. Finally, he told her that he had been alone for a very long time, that her presence in his castle was both a burden and a gift he had not expected. He did not want her to be miserable, he said, because misery was a poison that spread through stone walls and infected everything it touched. If she must be his prisoner, then perhaps they could find a way to make her captivity bearable for both of them. With those words, the beast withdrew, leaving Belle alone with her thoughts and the strange hope that had begun to bloom in her heart despite everything that had happened. Perhaps this story would not end as tragically as it had begun. Perhaps in this castle of shadows and secrets, something beautiful might still grow, like a rose blooming in winter, against all reason and expectation. The night settled around the castle like a comfortable blanket, and Belle found herself strangely unafraid as she lay down on the simple cot in her tower room. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, and perhaps new understanding of the mysterious creature who had become both her captor and, in some strange way, she didn't yet comprehend, her only companion in this magical, melancholy place where anything seemed possible, even love. Morning came to the enchanted castle like a gentle whisper, with golden sunlight streaming through tall windows and filling Belle's tower room with warmth that chased away the last shadows of her fears. She woke to find that her simple cot had been replaced during the night with a bed fit for royalty, piled high with silk coverlets in shades of rose and cream. Fresh clothes hung in a wardrobe that definitely hadn't been there the evening before. Gowns of every color imaginable, each one perfectly sized, as if they had been made just for her. A soft knock at her door made Belle's heart skip, but the voice that followed was not the beast's deep rumble. Instead, she heard something impossible, a teapot that seemed to be speaking in the warm, motherly tones of someone who had spent decades caring for others. The voice introduced itself as Mrs. Potts, explaining that she had come to escort Belle to her new quarters and perhaps show her around her new home. Belle opened the door cautiously, not sure what to expect, and gasped in wonder at what she found. A porcelain teapot sat on a silver tray, steam rising cheerfully from her spout, and beside her was the most adorable little teacup she had ever seen. The cup bounced excitedly on his saucer, introducing himself as Chip in a voice that sparkled with the enthusiasm only a child could possess. Mrs. Potts explained, in her gentle way, that they were all under the same curse that had transformed their master. Once, they had been human, the castle's devoted staff who had served the royal family for generations. Now, they lived as household objects, trapped in forms that barely allowed them to remember what it felt like to have hands and feet and hearts that beat with human rhythm. As Belle followed Mrs. Potts and Chip through corridors she hadn't seen the night before, she discovered that the entire castle was alive with enchanted inhabitants. Candlesticks bowed politely as she passed, their flames flickering in greeting. A grandfather clock chimed the hour with dignified precision, his pendulum swinging in perfect time. Feather dusters danced through the air, cleaning portraits and polishing surfaces with graceful efficiency. The new quarters prepared for Belle took her breath away completely. Her room was enormous, with windows that looked out over gardens where roses bloomed in impossible profusion. A fireplace crackled merrily, tended by a poker and bellows that worked in perfect harmony. Books lined one entire wall, more books than Belle had ever seen in one place, their leather spines promising adventures in every language and from every corner of the world. Mrs. Potts watched Belle's face light up as she discovered the library, and her warm chuckle filled the room like music. She explained that their master had always been a great reader, that these books had been his companions during the long years of his curse. Perhaps Belle might find some comfort in them, might discover stories that could make even the strangest circumstances feel like home. Chip bounced eagerly around Belle's feet, chattering about all the wonders the castle contained. There were music rooms where invisible orchestras played haunting melodies, art galleries filled with paintings that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them, and gardens where flowers bloomed year-round, regardless of the season outside the castle walls. But it was the dining room that truly amazed Belle when Mrs. Potts led her there for breakfast. The table was set with china, so fine it seemed to glow with inner light, and the meal that appeared before her was fit for an empress. Warm bread that smelled like her father's kitchen, jam that tasted of summer berries, and tea that somehow knew exactly how sweet she preferred it. As Belle ate, she became aware that she was being watched, not by the enchanted objects who bustled about their tasks with cheerful efficiency, but by someone else. She could feel eyes upon her, sense a presence that remained carefully hidden, but was unmistakably there. The beast, she realized, was observing her from somewhere in the shadows, perhaps trying to understand this strange young woman who had willingly traded her freedom for her father's. After breakfast, Belle asked if she might explore the castle grounds. Mrs. Potts hesitated, explaining that their master had given specific instructions about where Belle was and wasn't allowed to go. Most of the castle was open to her, but there was one wing, the east wing, that remained forbidden. Something in Mrs. Potts's voice, when she mentioned this restriction, made Belle's curiosity spark like flint striking steel. The castle gardens were a maze of beauty and melancholy that perfectly reflected their master's nature. Paths wound between flower beds, where roses bloomed beside flowers Belle couldn't name, their petals shifting color as clouds passed overhead. Fountains sang with crystal voices, and topiaries shaped like dancing couples waltzed eternally in the morning breeze. Belle found herself drawn to a particular garden where white roses grew in wild abundance. These were the flowers her father had tried to pick, she realized. The blossoms that had led to his capture and her own imprisonment. Yet, as she looked at them now, Belle couldn't bring herself to feel anger. They were too beautiful, too perfect in their innocence, like stars that had fallen to earth and taken root in soil that remembered what it meant to love. As she wandered deeper into the gardens, Belle became aware that she was no longer alone. The beast emerged from behind a grove of apple trees, moving with surprising grace for someone of his size and apparent fierceness. In daylight, he was even more magnificent than she had first thought, his fur catching the sun like spun gold and bronze, his eyes holding depths she was only beginning to fathom. They regarded each other in silence for a long moment, neither quite sure how to begin a conversation that had no precedent in either of their experiences. Finally, the beast asked if she was comfortable in her new quarters, if there was anything she needed that hadn't been provided. His voice was carefully controlled, polite in a way that suggested he was working very hard not to frighten her. Belle thanked him for his kindness, though she couldn't keep a slight edge from her voice when she mentioned that kindness from a captor was still captivity. The beast flinched as if she had struck him, and Belle immediately regretted her harsh words. She could see that he was trying, in his own way, to make an impossible situation bearable for both of them. They walked together through the gardens, maintaining a careful distance that spoke of mutual wariness and growing curiosity. The beast pointed out different flowers and trees, sharing bits of knowledge about their care and cultivation that revealed a gentler side to his nature. Belle found herself relaxing despite her circumstances, drawn into conversation about books and learning and the way gardens could teach patience to even the most restless hearts. When they reached a section of the garden where a stone bench sat beneath an arbor heavy with climbing roses, the beast gestured for Belle to sit if she wished. He remained standing, towering over her, but somehow managing not to seem threatening. The morning sun filtered through the rose petals above, casting dancing patterns of light and shadow that made the whole scene feel like something from a dream. Belle asked about the curse that had befallen the castle, the magic that had transformed the beast and his servants into their current forms. The beast's expression grew distant, painful, as if her question had opened old wounds that had never properly healed. He told her, in halting words, about his past arrogance, his cruelty to those less fortunate, his complete inability to see beyond his own desires and pleasures. An enchantress had come to his castle years ago, disguised as an old beggar woman seeking shelter from a storm. The beast, then a spoiled prince who cared nothing for anyone's comfort but his own, had turned her away with cruel laughter. In return, she had revealed her true form and cursed him, transforming him into a creature whose outside finally matched the ugliness she saw within his heart. The curse could only be broken, the enchantress had explained, if someone could learn to love him despite his monstrous appearance, and if he could learn to love in return. But who could love a beast? Who could see past the claws and fangs to find whatever humanity might still remain beneath? The enchanted rose she had left behind would bloom until his 21st year. If the curse wasn't broken by the time the last petal fell, he would remain a beast forever. Belle listened to this story with growing compassion, seeing not the monster her father had described, but a soul in torment, someone who had been punished perhaps more severely than his crimes deserved. She asked how long he had been cursed, and the answer made her heart ache. 10 years, he told her. 10 years of solitude and reflection, of watching his servants suffer for his mistakes, of wondering if redemption was even possible for someone who had caused so much pain. The conversation was interrupted by the cheerful voice of Chip, who came bouncing through the garden to announce that lunch was ready. The little teacup was followed by a parade of enchanted objects, all eager to meet their master's new companion properly. There was Lumiere, a candelabra whose French accent made everything he said sound like poetry, and Cogsworth, a mantel clock whose pompous manner couldn't quite hide his good heart. Each of the enchanted servants had their own story of transformation, their own memories of the humans they had once been. Yet Belle noticed that none of them seemed to blame their master for their fate. Instead, they worried about him, cared for him with the devotion of a family that had chosen to stay together through the darkest of times. Lunch was served in a sunny breakfast room where windows looked out over the castle's front courtyard. Belle found herself seated across from the beast, who ate with careful manners that spoke of a noble upbringing he had never quite forgotten. The conversation flowed more easily than either of them had expected, touching on books they had both read, places they had heard about but never seen, dreams they had harbored in the days when dreaming still seemed safe. The beast was surprisingly well-educated, Belle discovered, with knowledge that ranged from literature to science to art. He spoke several languages and had clearly spent his years of imprisonment reading everything in his vast library. Yet, there was a sadness in his learning, as if all that knowledge was simply another room in the prison where he lived, beautiful but ultimately empty, without someone to share it. After lunch, Belle expressed a desire to see more of the castle, particularly the library that Mrs. Potts had mentioned. The beast's face lit up with an enthusiasm that transformed his fearsome features into something almost handsome. He led her through corridors lined with artwork and tapestries, past rooms filled with treasures from around the world, to a set of double doors that he opened with obvious pride. The library that lay beyond those doors was the most magnificent room Belle had ever seen. Books rose from floor to ceiling on shelves that seemed to stretch into infinity. Ladders on wheels provided access to the highest volumes, and comfortable reading chairs were scattered throughout like islands of invitation. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny fairies in the golden air. Belle stood in the doorway with tears of joy streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the beauty and generosity of the gift. The beast watched her reaction with growing wonder, hardly daring to believe that someone could be made so happy by something he had taken for granted for years. When Belle whispered that it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, the beast felt something stir in his chest that he had thought dead forever. He told her that the library was hers now, that she could read any book she chose, could spend as many hours as she wished, lost in the adventures and romances and mysteries that filled those countless volumes. For the first time since her imprisonment began, Belle felt a spark of genuine happiness, a sense that perhaps this strange new life might hold unexpected treasures. They spent the afternoon in comfortable companionship, Belle exploring the shelves while the beast sat nearby, occasionally recommending a particular author or sharing a memory associated with a favorite volume. The silence between them was no longer awkward, but peaceful, the quiet of two people who were beginning to understand that they might have more in common than either had dared hope. And so, dear dreamer, as the enchanted castle settles into the gentle rhythm of evening, Belle and her beast begin to discover that the most powerful magic of all isn't found in fairy godmothers or magical spells, but in the quiet moments when two hearts learn to see past surface and circumstance to find the beauty that lives within. Their story continues to unfold, like the pages of Belle's beloved books, filled with wonder, transformation, and the timeless truth that love grows strongest in the most unexpected places. Let these whispered words carry you now into your own peaceful dreams, where castles gleam under starlight, and every ending is really just a new beginning, waiting to bloom like roses in an enchanted garden.